My name is Eliza. I'm 26 years old and I work as an interior designer. Most days, I turn empty rooms into something beautiful for other people. But lately, I've been thinking more about what beauty means when it comes from memories, not design. I grew up in a house that was quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind of quiet that presses into your chest and stays there. We didn't talk about emotions much. We didn't talk much at all, except when there was music. My mom used to play the piano late at night. Not every night, but often enough that it became a part of my childhood. I remember lying in bed and listening to the soft melodies float through the air like whispers. She never played for anyone else. It was private, something sacred. Her music was the only time I ever heard her speak without words, and I loved it. But then everything changed. My dad left. I was 15, and my mom stopped playing the piano the same week. She closed it up, covered it with an old quilt, and eventually moved it down to the basement. That was it. She never spoke about it, never explained. I asked once, and she just said, "It's better that way." I didn't ask again. Now, years later, I still think about those nights. The way the house felt warmer when she played, the way I imagined she smiled while she did. And with her birthday approaching, I kept circling back to one idea. What if I brought that piano back to life? It was risky. My mom isn't the emotional type. She doesn't like surprises. But I felt like maybe, just maybe, it could mean something to her. So I made the decision. I went down to the basement one afternoon while she was out and pulled off the old quilt. The piano looked worse than I remembered. The wood was dull and stained, the keys were chipped, and a few were missing entirely. The pedals creaked, but I could still see it, the potential, the memory, the music. I called a piano restoration specialist the next day. He was shocked at the condition, but promised he could make it beautiful again. The process would take 3 weeks and cost more than I really had. I drained my savings account, I worked overtime, I stopped going out on weekends. Every sacrifice felt worth it. As the restoration progressed, I received photo updates. Slowly, the piano began to shine again. New ivory keys, sanded and polished wood, fresh felt on the hammers. I kept imagining my mom's face when she saw it, her eyes lighting up, her fingers brushing over the keys. I even imagined her playing again. Maybe we'd sit together while she told me the stories behind the pieces she used to play. Maybe this gift would help her reconnect with something she'd buried too deep. On the night before her birthday, I had the piano delivered back to our house. I placed it in the living room, exactly where it had stood when I was a child. I tied a deep red ribbon around it and left a small card. "For the songs you once loved." I stayed up all night thinking about how she would react. This was more than a gift. It was a message, a gesture of love, a way to say, "I see you, I remember you, I miss the music." I was nervous, but mostly excited. I had no idea what was about to happen. The morning of her birthday, I felt like I was 6 years old again, waiting for her approval on a school project I had worked too hard on. I made breakfast early, scrambled eggs with chives, her favorite raspberry jam on toasted sourdough, and the strongest coffee I could brew. I placed everything on the table with the same care I used in arranging the living room the night before. The piano gleamed under the soft morning light, its ribbons still tied neatly. It looked elegant, special, worthy of her. When I heard her footsteps creaking down the hallway, my heart started to race. She walked into the kitchen with her usual slow, measured steps, wearing her faded gray robe and that unreadable expression she wore almost every morning. "Happy birthday," I said with a hopeful smile. She nodded. "Thank you, Eliza." She sat down, and I tried not to fidget as we ate in silence. I was waiting for her to notice, for her to look up, tilt her head toward the living room, and see what I had done. But she didn't. After several agonizing minutes, I set my fork down. "There's something I want to show you." She raised an eyebrow slightly, then followed me into the living room. I stepped aside to let her take it in. Her eyes landed on the piano instantly. She stopped. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared, her eyes wide and unmoving. Then slowly she stepped forward and ran her fingers along the polished edge. She touched the ribbon, then the keys. She pressed one. The note echoed softly in the room. "I had it restored," I said, gently. "For you." Still silence. Her hand hovered over the keys, then lowered. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned to me. "Why would you bring this back?" she asked. And her voice wasn't warm, it was sharp, almost accusing. I blinked. I thought you missed it." "Missed it?" She took a step back from the piano, her eyes locked onto mine. "That piano was a part of one of the worst times of my life." I felt like I had been slapped. I remembered how you used to play, the way the house felt warmer when you played, the way I imagined you smiled while you did. She laughed a soft, bitter laugh. "I didn't play because I was happy, Eliza. I played to survive. Every night after your dad left, I sat there and poured out everything I couldn't tell you. Every note was pain. And when I finally stopped, I swore I'd never touch it again." My voice cracked. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't. And I don't blame you for not knowing, but some things are better left alone." I looked at the piano again. It was beautiful, perfectly restored. Every detail had been lovingly brought back to life, but in that moment, it felt cold. "I spent everything I had on it," I said almost without thinking. "I wanted to give you something meaningful." She softened slightly at that. "I know you meant well, and I'm grateful that you thought of me, but Eliza, not every part of our past deserves resurrection." She turned and left the room, leaving me standing there alone, surrounded by silence once more. The piano sat open, polished, ready, but it didn't play. Not that day. The piano stayed untouched in the living room for days. After that morning, my mother avoided it completely. She walked past it like it wasn't there, like I had dragged a ghost into our home and parked it in the center of everything. The living room felt heavier somehow, as if the air itself had thickened with memories she didn't want to face. I tried to act normal. I cleaned the kitchen, folded the laundry, watered the plants, anything to fill the silence. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Not every part of our past deserves resurrection. The words echoed in my head at night when I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something meant as love could hurt so much. She never brought it up again, not once. One evening, I found myself sitting at the piano alone. I didn't know how to play, not really, but I pressed a few keys gently, letting the notes rise like questions in an empty room. I closed my eyes and imagined what she must have felt back then, abandoned, exhausted, sitting at this very bench trying to bleed out grief in sound. I suddenly felt so small, so naive. I had wanted to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. That night at dinner, the silence stretched again, until finally I couldn't take it anymore. "I thought it would make you happy," I said, quietly. She looked up from her plate. "What?" "The piano. I thought maybe it would be something we could share. A way to remember the parts of you that used to smile." She put her fork down. "Eliza, I haven't forgotten how to smile. I just don't do it for things that hurt." I nodded, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "But didn't you ever love it? The music, I mean." I did, she said softly, but love doesn't always survive pain. Sometimes the two become tangled, and when that happens, even beautiful things can turn into reminders of everything you've lost. I stared at my plate. I just wanted to feel closer to you. Her eyes softened. I know, and I'm sorry if I made you feel like your gift was wrong. It wasn't. It was beautiful, thoughtful. It just brought up things I've buried. Maybe burying them didn't work. Maybe they've been growing in the dark all this time. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, finally, she said something I never expected. Do you want to learn? My eyes widened. Learn what? To play, she said. If you want, I could teach you. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A beginning. We didn't touch the piano that night, or the next, but something had shifted. A small bridge, shaky and unfinished, had been laid between us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were both ready to cross it. We started slowly. The next Sunday afternoon, she pulled out an old music book from a storage box in her closet. It was worn, the pages yellowed and bent, filled with penciled notes and little scribbles I assumed she had made when she was younger. She didn't say much as she handed it to me, just, "This is where I began." She sat beside me on the piano bench like it was the most natural thing in the world, but I noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the first page. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that's heavy but full of meaning. I was afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever fragile piece had started to grow between us. We started with scales. Left hand, right hand. She corrected my posture, gently nudging my elbows into place, showing me how to curve my fingers properly. Her touch was light, almost distant, but careful, like she didn't want to scare me away, or maybe scare herself. At first, I was terrible. I hit wrong notes, got frustrated, groaned. But she didn't laugh. She didn't scold. She just said, "Again." And I tried again. Each lesson was less about music and more about rhythm, of time, of memory, of trust. We rarely talked about the past, but sometimes she would pause during a lesson and stare at the keys, lost in a thought she didn't share. Other times, she would smile at a melody and say, "Your grandfather used to hum that in the kitchen while cooking pasta." Little by little, she opened. One day I asked her what piece she used to play the most. She said, "Claire de Lune," she said after a pause. "Your father hated it, said it made me feel like we were always at a funeral." "And you loved it?" "I loved how it made me feel, like I was far away from here." That stuck with me. Music, for her, wasn't about beauty. It was about escape. A lifeboat in a storm she never wanted to talk about. Still, she played a few notes of it for me. Her fingers found the melody with ease, and suddenly the room felt like the past and present had collapsed into one. It wasn't perfect. She stumbled on a chord and stopped abruptly, but it was real, honest. We sat in silence for a moment after. "I didn't realize how much I missed hearing you play," I whispered. She didn't respond. At first, then softly, "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it again." It wasn't just a lesson anymore. It was therapy. Each note we played chipped away at the years of distance between us. Each shared mistake, each little success brought something back that had been lost for too long. It wasn't easy. Some days she was quieter. Other days I could feel her slipping into old pain, her eyes glossing over. But she kept showing up. We both did. And slowly our house filled with music again. Not the flawless kind, but the kind that says, we're trying. And sometimes, trying is more powerful than perfection. By the 5th week of our lessons, the piano no longer felt like a stranger in the room. The tension that once clung to it like dust had started to lift. My mother didn't flinch when she walked past it anymore, and I stopped feeling like I had to apologize every time I touched a wrong key. Still, I knew we weren't healed, not fully. There were silences between us that weren't musical, questions I hadn't dared to ask, stories she hadn't dared to tell. One rainy afternoon, I arrived home from work to find her sitting at the piano alone. She didn't hear me come in. Her back was straight, her fingers hovering above the keys. I froze in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt whatever private moment she had allowed herself. Then she began to play. It wasn't one of our practice songs. It wasn't even something familiar. The piece was raw, emotional, improvised. Her hands moved with more urgency than elegance, and there were a few mistakes. But it was beautiful. It was her. Fully her. I sat on the stairs quietly, listening as the storm outside tapped against the windows in rhythm. She finished the piece with a lingering chord, and I saw her shoulders tremble. She wiped at her cheek before standing. That's when she saw me. We locked eyes. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said softly. She sat back down slowly. "It's okay." I walked over and sat beside her, careful not to speak too soon. "That was beautiful," I finally said. She looked down at the keys. "It wasn't supposed to be." "What was it?" She hesitated. Then, "It was the piece I wrote the night he left." I didn't breathe. She continued, "I never played it again. I composed it in one sitting, didn't even write it down. I thought I'd forget it, but I didn't." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached out and touched her hand, resting gently over the keys. "Do you want to write it down now?" She looked at me surprised. "What?" "You remember it. You still carry it. Maybe it deserves to exist beyond memory." She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, slowly. "Maybe." The next day, we bought sheet music paper. We sat together for hours, replaying that same haunting melody until it lived on the page. We gave it a name, Departure. It became part of our practice, but it was more than that. It became a kind of anchor, a truth between us that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Weeks turned into months. The piano, once a symbol of pain, had become something else entirely. Connection. Even laughter. One evening, as we were packing up after a lesson, my mom turned to me. "I used to hate that you looked like him," she said suddenly. I froze. "But now, I see you." The way she said it, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't even sad. It was honest. I nodded. "I used to think you didn't want to see me at all." She took a breath. I was angry. Not at you. At everything. And the piano, when you brought it back, I thought you were dragging me into a past I was trying to survive. I met her eyes. "But you're not surviving anymore. You're living." She gave a small smile. "Maybe for the first time in a long while." Spring arrived quietly that year. The trees outside bloomed with small white flowers, and sunlight poured through the living room windows in golden waves. The piano stood in its place, no longer a monument to grief, but a part of our home, alive again, like us. My mother played often now, not every day, but when she did, it felt different. Lighter, like she wasn't trying to escape anything, just to be present. Sometimes I would hear her hum along softly, eyes closed, lost in music for the right reasons. We finished learning Departure together. She even let me record it on my phone. One night we listened to the playback in silence, then laughed when we heard my clumsy entry at the bridge. "You'll get it eventually," she said, smiling. "I don't want to get it perfect. I want to get it with you." That moment stayed with me. We talked more now, about my job, her garden, books we used to love, and sometimes the harder things. The years between us, the way we both misunderstood each other and our own silent grief. I didn't realize how hungry I'd been for her attention until I finally had it. And she, in turn, seemed to rediscover parts of herself she thought she'd buried with the past. Not all wounds had healed, but we had stopped pretending they didn't exist. For her next birthday, I didn't get her anything extravagant. Instead, I printed the sheet music we had written together, framed it in a simple black frame, and placed it above the piano. Departure, composed by Marie Coldwell, played by Marie and Eliza. She cried when she saw it. This time not out of pain, but from something else, something softer. She whispered, "I never thought this would mean anything again." I said, "You made it mean something." We both did. She pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel stiff or reluctant. It felt right. Warm. Real. Music still filled the house, but now it was accompanied by conversation, laughter, and sometimes just the comfort of silence between two people who finally understood each other. Restoring the piano brought up pain, yes, but it also brought us back together. Not in the way I expected, but maybe in the way we needed. Some gifts don't arrive wrapped in ribbon. Sometimes they come as a second chance. Do you enjoy stories with emotion and twists? Then like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Here, every word touches you.